I'm going to start with the opening brachas for all of us. Just have the bracha in mind. I'm having you all in mind. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. V'arev na Adonai Eloheinu divrei Toracha b'finu u'pfiam chabeit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzeinu v'tzeitzeim chabeit Yisrael kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratav lishma. Baruch atah Adonai lemei Torah l'mo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chabanu mikol hamim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Okay. Guys, can you hear me well? Because there's an angle ground with the background. That's what I put on the headset. Okay, I haven't suddenly become a pilot. All right. So, guys, I just want to give you a little bit of a summary for 2 minutes yesterday. Michael, were you able to hear that 15-minute excerpt apart from that hour share? I know you haven't been one.
Yeah, most of it, but summaries are always good if you want to.
Okay, and the excerpt you managed to listen to, did you get a chance to?
Yeah. I left out I couldn't catch the last few minutes, but most of it, yeah.
But you got most of it. So you got the whole part of the slave.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So just a summary quickly of yesterday is that we said that there's two contemporaries. There's Rav and Shmuel. Now, Rav is saying that under the primary categories of the Mishnah, when it mentions ox, underneath it are the three primary categories of ox, keren, shein, and regel. And what Shmuel says is that ox covers one category and maveh covers shein under maveh. In other words, shein under maveh is covered, and the main category of ox in the Mishnah is covered by another category. This is a dispute between two of Shmuel's students. So Rav Yehuda, who was a student of Shmuel, said that we taught keren as the biblical enactment when the Mishnah mentions ox, and Rava, which is not to be confused with Rav, who is also a student of Shmuel, said that when Shmuel refers to ox in the Mishnah, it's actually referring to regel. Okay, that's the bottom line. And what we're saying is that in many cases, Rav and Shmuel do not disagree. They both agree that the nature of keren, shein, and regel are vastly different to each other, and that if you mention one, you cannot deduce the other. That was the summary. And what we said is that the Gemara seemed to like the interpretation of Rava, the student of Shmuel, because it came to a question of saying, well, what are you going to do with the third one left? So Rav Yehuda says as follows, is that ox is referring to keren, Shmuel is referring to keren, and Mav is referring to shein. And then they said, well, what are you going to do with regel? And he said that it's mentioned with the aspect that it says in the Mishnah, when it damages, the damager is obligated. And he said that that verse, the extra verse, the damager, is superfluous, and that comes to include liability for regel. And the Gemara says, well, why did you have to bring it up in why does it have to be brought up in such a hidden way? Why can't it just say the word regel? And because he doesn't have a specific answer for it, the Gemara can't work it out, and it abandons his view. Now, when we say it abandons the view of Rav Yehuda, we're not saying Rav Yehuda is wrong. You must remember later generations couldn't sometimes work out because they were missing brises what the earlier generations used as a reference source. You get what I'm saying? So again, they're all using biblical reference sources, the same sources. We're just saying, why wasn't regel mentioned explicitly in this stuff? And because we can't work out Rav Yehuda's view, who Rav Yehuda again is a student of Shmuel, we abandon it, and then we say, well, what about Shmuel's other student, Rava? And he's got a bit of a better explanation, which we can understand by our generation. And it's not better compared to Rav Yehuda. It's just better because we're not missing some of the information today when they're trying to interpret Rav Yehuda's explanation of his teacher Shmuel. So what does he say? He says, look, the primary category of ox in the Mishnah doesn't refer to keren. In fact, that refers to regel. and Mave refers to Shane. So they said, well, where do you find the source of Keren? And he also gives the biblical source, and they say, well, where do you find it actually written in the Mishnah itself? And it says when it damages, the damage is obligated, and that comes to include Keren. And it says, hang on a second, but Rav Yehuda said the same thing. Why doesn't it mention outright? But he's got a great answer, which we can understand because we're not missing some of the brises. And that is, the actual Mishnah is coming to teach only damages that are muad from the outset, that there is full payment required. And that is, if you have a look at when he brings the term ox, he brings regel, and regel is full payment. Then he brings mave for shane, and shane is full payment. Then it's brought with regards to pit. Pit is full payment. Then it brings with regards to fire. Fire is full payment. So I said we can't bring Keren explicitly because in this Mishnah it's only talking about payments that are full from the outset. And if you want to bring Keren is in a later Mishnah where it talks about partial payments for the first three occurrences. So this Mishnah is only talking about penalties that are muad from the outset. Does that make sense? And even according to Rav doesn't disagree with this particular point of Rava. Why? Because man is considered muad from the outside. Meaning, if Mave is man, we said that a person when he sleeps is fully muad because he thrashes in his sleep, he has no control, and therefore he is responsible in full. The same as if one's bodily fluids create damage through mucus trajectory, that the Torah and the Av are the same in terms of damages. So this Mishnah is only talking about muad from the outset, according to Rava, opinion of his teacher Shmuel. So the Gemara likes that. And on that term, we ended yesterday. Does that make sense, guys? This is the most simple way I can bring it across.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Cool. I'm sorry to make it so simple and bottom line, but I think Michael brought a great point to me on the phone, and that is, after we've gone through detail, it's nice to have a compact summary, and he's 100% correct. Now, something's appeared on my screen. Okay, sorry, it's a nasty little bug. Okay, so it now says, well, why did Rav reject Shmuel's interpretation of Mave? It's going, in other words, Mave, according to Shmuel, is shame too, and Rav is rejecting this. So now the Gemara turns to the discussion of Shmuel's rejections of Rav's interpretation. Because up until now, we've said that Rav isn't happy with Shmuel's interpretation of the Mishnah, because Shmuel wants to say that Mave is shame. And then it brought two of Shmuel's students to defend him. First one it brought was Rav Yehuda. The next one it brought was Rava. You get what I'm saying? And now it's turning the tables and it says, well, Shmuel obviously has an argument against Rav. So what is this argument? Why can't Mave refer to man, according to Shmuel? So Shmuel says, if you would think that Mave refers to man, then the Mishnah would be redundant. For the Mishnah states in a later section, the muad ox and the ox that damages, okay, on the premises of his fellow, of the damaged party and man. Since man is mentioned in the later Mishnah, it would be superfluous to mention it in our Mishnah. So the Mave cannot mean man. So what he's actually referring to is there is a case in 15b where it mentions man. So according to Shmuel, he says to Rav, why did you mention it here? You know, we're mentioning it later. It's not necessary to mention it here. It's actually redundant. Okay? So let me just unpack 15b. In 15b that we're going to cover, the Mishnah is saying there are 5 tamim and 5 muadim. So let me tell you what tamim is. A tam are tame and are tame cases, and those are half payments, right? And a muad are cases where there are full damages. Now, muad doesn't only refer to keren. Remember we said that muad can refer to a pit, a fire, mankind, regel, shane, or an ox that habitually gores. So in 15b, it discusses everything that's muad and the 5 cases that are tame, where half damages are required. And what we're going to come and see is that a tam damage, a half damage, might come to include other half damages that have not necessarily to do with a tame animal. So basically, Shmuel is saying to Rav, well, there's no mention to mention man here, because in the section where we're dealing with muadin, man is mentioned. So what happens is the Tana teaches man in the... so let me just unpack this simply. So what happens here is that the Gemara also brings a point that the Mishnah, the opening Mishnah, according to the Tana, Shmuel, is only speaking about damage inflicted by one's property. Okay, so let's go through this. If we have a look, ox is one's property, yes. A pit is an obstacle or a creation of man that's prone to damage from inception. A fire is man's creation, and they're determined, meaning property. I remember Gavin mentioned this in a share or two ago. He said, what do you mean a property? You know, it's not like somebody owns a pit or a fire. But the point of it is, it's not man itself. It's something man has created. So therefore, man has to take responsibility. So according to Shmuel, the first Mishnah is only dealing with man's property and not damage by man inflicted by himself. So he would say there's no place for it here. So the Gemara says, like, listen, this is an interesting point. How would Rav deal with Shmuel's objection here? Do any of you have anything to add, by the way?
No, good at this stage.
Marco? Kevin? Kev?
No. James, by the way,
can you hear me?
The guys that are above them.
Okay, yeah, this is a good point because many of you have said it is confusing. Everybody's named Rav.
Yeah, no,
how do we determine who it is? Okay, so what we're saying here is from 15b to 16a, according to Shmuel, only one's property or one's creative damage is mentioned. Damage inflicted by oneself, which is man, is not mentioned. And it says it wouldn't be a superfluous thing. Why would man be mentioned twice? Now, the Gemara poses this question to Rav and says, all right, this makes sense because in the later section, it deals with the category of man. So, Rav, what would you say to this? And Rav would say that, listen, we're not here to talk about it in length. In many of the Gemaras to follow, we're actually having a discussion, a lengthy discussion, of all the damages that are caused. It's not like, for example, when you're mentioning keren once, it's the only time that it mentions keren. I mean, there's whole chapters that are just dedicated to the damage of man on property, regel, etc. So what it comes here to do is merely to count it among the damages. In other words, if I give you a list of damages and I say, listen, this is a portfolio of damage, these are the bottom line list of damages in the first place to introduce you, almost what you call a table of contents. And this is what's going to be mentioned to follow. So just because it's mentioned later, Rav said, there's no reason not to count it here. It is a damager. So the Mishnah, the Gemara now wants to explain the next section of the Mishnah according to Rav's view. Because remember, we've just mentioned everything according to Shmuel's view by these two students defending him. Okay. So according to Rav, this is the explanation. The ox is not like the mave, etc. So let's unpack this. So the nature of the ox, if it kills a person, pays kofar and obligates the owner to pay kofar, is not similar to a man who kills a person that does not pay kofar damage. So remember how the Mishnah started. It says the ox is not like the mave and the mave is not like the ox. Okay? And they said both of these things are living. So what Rav is saying is, listen, we have to learn ox. We can't break up the categories of ox. Ox is one particular form of damage and man is another. And the reason why we're mentioning this is because there are differences in payment. And now Rav's going to pack two differences. The one, if a person kills compared to an ox, and the other one is if a person damages compared to an ox. So I just want to explain to you what the kofir payment is. Gavin and I touched on it in Sanhedrin. So a kofir payment is a payment of negligence, meaning your ox was warned, you were warned many times that your ox was dangerous. It's not a once-off occurrence. Say, for example, your ox damages at first, and when your ox damages at first, it kills somebody. The reality is that is absolutely tragic. But at the hands of heaven, B'nai Shemaim, they don't hold you as responsible because it's not a habitual damager. If you know something is dangerous, say for example, you keep a gun in a safe and the kids know the safe code and one of them offs themselves by accident. But you never knew they knew the safe code and you always kept the bullet separately and you put it in. That is tragic and you'll never recover from that. But how much more damaging it is if you keep a loaded gun on the table in arm's reach of a toddler. That is a different degree of negligence. So what they're saying is a more damager here is when you keep going to court and you keep getting warned that this ox of yours is dangerous to the point that full payment is required if it damages. Now, if it kills, B'nai Shemaim, at the hands of heaven, they're going to hold you responsible to a different level because you didn't care. And a kofir payment means that you should die at the hands of heaven. What does that mean in real terms? It means that you could die prematurely, but on spiritual terms, it means you're held accountable for the death. Now, the Beis Din can't kill you on such grounds. Why? There's something called indirect killing. Okay, groma. So indirect killing is when you can't actually get the death penalty. Say, for example, you hire a hitman to kill. You don't get the actual death penalty yourself because the person that you hired actually pulled the trigger. They will hold you responsible for the death in Shemaim, but the Beis Din can't convict you. Because if they come to the hitman, they'll turn around to the hitman and say, you knew the law, that it was against the law to take somebody out, irrespective of whether there's money. There were witnesses against you, and you're getting the death penalty. But Hashem doesn't forget, and Hashem holds that person responsible as if he committed the murder in Shemaim. And what you've got to realize is a person's execution can be a kapora for their soul, meaning that to a certain extent, it doesn't necessarily exonerate them, but if they are truly sorry for what they did, they sometimes have to pay their life for a life that they took. And if you don't get away with things in inverted commas. You're held responsible by Hashem. So what was a kofir payment? A kofir payment was saying, like just saying Yom Kippur, when we do a kapora payment and said this animal, it gives you an awareness that when we do the kapora with the chickens, etc., that it is us that should lose our lives on some of the sins that we've done. So what a kofir payment is it's discussed in the later Gemara. Is it a compensation to the next of kin? Where when the ox kills and it's mo'ad, you're compensating the family on that additional loss, apart from other payments that you make? Or is it a case that it is a penalty payment for you, not just a compensation for the family, because you were warned? And this thing of the kofir payments is very heavy and it's going to affect you deeply financially. Now, just bear in mind that the kofir payment is not a payment where you get off the hook. Shemaim's still going to hold you responsible, but you're not going to be judged as stringently necessarily if you started to make steps of restitution. Okay? Now, there is a principle that if a person kills another person, you don't pay the kofir payment. Why? Because one pays with their life. you get executed. So if you kill on purpose, you get executed. And if you kill accidentally through negligence, if a person kills a person, not an ox kills a person, you go to the city of refuge, you get excommunicated, and you spend your lifetime there until the Kohen Gadol dies. So what happens is there's a principle that Gavin learned in the Gemara Sanhedrin, which basically says a lesser payment is removed for a bigger payment. So if you lose your life, you don't have to pay the kofar payment, meaning that the lesser damage is waived. So for example, if we learned in Gemara Shabbos where somebody is subject to do 2 death penalties, you can't kill the person twice. And so, for example, you've got a less stringent death penalty and a more stringent death penalty. Just so there's something where you did blasphemy compared to murder. So they take the most stringent death penalty and give it to you because you might have created 2 sins where one's a less of a death penalty and one's a higher. So the lower penalty gets waived if you have to pay the higher penalty if the act is created almost simultaneously. Kivle dirabba minay. I think that was the concept. Are there any questions so far?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So all Rav was trying to say at the moment is in a case where an ox kills a person, you have to pay a kofar payment. And when a man kills another man, you don't pay the kofar payment. And why not? Because when you execute somebody or they kill negligently, they get a much more stringent penalty, and therefore the higher kofar payment is not needed to be paid. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to say, according to Rav, now what happens if an ox damages a person compared to a man damaging a person? So an ox damaging a person is responsible for what you call nezek damage. So nezek is pure damages, okay? It's the actual damage. But if a person injures another person, you're responsible for 4 additional damages on top of that, okay? And what he's coming to say is that the reason we don't mention ox and mave man, it's the same category, is that man, because they're subject to 4 additional payments apart from the nezek, the actual damage, we want to say the ox is not like the mave and the mave is not like the ox. And we discussed where there was death involved, and now we're discussing where there's damage involved. So these are the 4 extra payments. And this is discussed in the Mishnah in 83b. Okay, so you've got nezek, which is the actual damage, right? Then you've got something called sar, which is damage for pain. It's the compensation for physical pain suffered by the damaged party. And remember, this is only when man injures man. Now, what do we say? How do you calculate nezek? How do you calculate sar, the pain damage? So if, for example, you're in these barbaric Middle Eastern countries, and they say to you, listen, you were caught stealing, I'm going to chop your hand off. And it's going to hurt, like you've never experienced hurt before, but I can give you an anesthetic or knock you out clean or give you some alcohol beforehand so you won't know what day it is. And when we chop your hands, we immediately seal the wound by burning metal onto it so it cauterizes the wound so you won't die. But what will you pay me as a side payment? This is what the executioner tells the prisoner. In order that I take away your tzar, what are you going to pay for an anesthetic? Now, all of a sudden you say, do I pay for pain, etc.? When I'm using this example, you realize that pain has a value. It really, really, really does have a value. You know, you'd bond your house to reduce that sort of payment, believe me. Now, let's take healing, for example. Healing is refuah. That's another payment that man does when he damages man. And that's the compensation for medical costs of curing the damaged party from the damage inflicted. Now, the one question I have in the Gemara is this particular case is if an ox damages a person for the actual damage, is medical cost not covered? So this is something I've got to speak to Rabbi Cohen about. But for sure, when man injures man, there's the refuah, there's the healing cost for medical bills. Now you've got another cost. You've got what you call shevet. Now shevet comes from the word Shabbat. And so what does Shabbat mean? It means that you're not working during that period of time. You don't work during Shabbat. So shevet is unemployment. So while you're convalescing, you can't work during that time. And that payment has to be accounted for. Now, what happens is when you pay somebody back for that, that's not a payment you make in terms of what they're really worth if they're a CEO of a company. What you say is that sort of damage is paid when the person, say for example, they're a Torah scribe and they earn a high salary as a Torah scribe, but now they're an amputee because you chop their arm off. In this particular case, you damage them for the unemployment as though they would be a night watchman. In other words, being an amputee, what work could they fulfill at that period of time? You don't have to pay them. You've already paid for actual damages and compensation for that unemployment as if they're earning their higher salary. You pay them for the unemployment as though they're working in the new state, but they just can't work in the new state because they need time to recover. And there is one more damage. There's bashek, which is humiliation in case you strike them in public. Okay? So by contrast, an ox that damages a person, you don't have to pay those 4 additional damages, just nezek, the actual damage. And this is derived from Leviticus 24:19. If it says, if a man puts a blemish in his fellow, and this is coming to include those extra damages if man damages man. Okay, and that's all I really wanted to cover today. I don't know if it makes sense. Are there any questions?
Just on the man. Sorry, I missed one of them. Sorry, I lost a train of thought for a second. There were 4. There's the refuah, the compensation for medical. There's the compensation for when he's out of work, and there's compensation going forward as well, right? Correct. If he
okay, let me just give you the bottom line. There's 5. The main one, which applies whether an ox damages a person or a person damages a person, is nezek. That's the actual damage. Okay, that's the actual damage. So apart from the actual damage, which includes the higher wages he could have earned as his former career, you have to pay for that. If now he can only do a limited job because of the damage, part of the nezek is the actual damage. Is you pay for his loss of ability, but you pay for the loss of ability as described as his value on the slave market. So you're not paying quite what it is, because if he was a CEO and now he's a night watchman, that'll bankrupt you. So the reality is there's a happy medium. It's his potential versus actual based on certain limitations. So that's nezek. Then you've got sar, which is pain. You've got refuah, which is healing. In other words, the medical costs. You've got shevet, which is unemployment while he's convalescing, which is paid at the rate of what he's now able to function at, not at his former self, in terms of the damages amount. And you've got for bashek, which is humiliation if you struck him in public.
Just explain that first one again. So if you damage a guy, all right, and he can carry on as a CEO. Let's say he can carry on as a CEO. You have to pay him as a CEO just for the period while he's recovering, or how does it work? Or even that night watchman example, is it only while he's recovering?
Listen,
or
Kabb,
you have to pay the difference between the night watchman. I mean, you have to pay the night watchman. You pay it until he finds a job, basically, or what?
Gav, in the Mishnah in 83b, this whole thing is going to be unpacked. I'm using this just to give you the bottom line damages. We're going to discuss this for a week or two.
Okay,
that's when we get to 83b. The point I'm trying to say is Nezek, the actual damage is for ox damaging a man or man damaging a man. The 4 extra payments of pain, healing, unemployment, and embarrassment, etc., are when man damages man. How it unpacks, etc., will be discussed later. All I'm saying is that the period of healing, you're paying them a discounted rate for not for the healing, because that's medical costs, for the unemployment while they're convalescing, based on what they're able to do currently.
Okay.
Any questions, guys?
No.
No, I'm cool. That was very good.
Great, Jam. Wow.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
you
Damon.
okay?
Yeah, just a lot of information to absorb. So, but I got the gist. Yes, I've heard the concepts before.
Yeah, listen, we only had one Zoom lesson, and it is a lot to unpack. But the thing of it is, if you listen to this again, you'll get a sense of it. And then when I give you the bottom line tomorrow, it's going to sink in. It'll definitely help.
All right, good.
Cool. Thanks, guys. I hope you have a good day. I know Michael isn't feeling 100%, so I didn't want to do an additional Zoom session. It's not necessary.
All right, much appreciated. Listen, I think we covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Damon. It was awesome.
Pleasure, guys.
Amen.
Guys, see you tomorrow.